like to give a special thanks to Magic X Beats, produced this track, Proclaim Your Nationality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance, Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality.
Thank you for tuning in to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I am your host, Shem L. I am the author of several books, including Land of the Free, which you can purchase on my website, sheml.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. You also have the opportunity to enroll into my mentorship program, 6-month mentorship program, known as Triumph to Trauma. I'm sorry, I got it backwards. It's Trauma to Triumph Training. Trauma to Triumph Training, which is a 6-month course which addresses generational trauma, racial trauma, and post-traumatic slave syndrome. So we can conquer these issues and get back to the great people that we are. So with that stated, also, I want to give you updates on the economic, the first social and economic conference to take place in Durham, North Carolina in January of next year, 2022. We also have an additional speaker that has agreed to become a part of the program. So we have 2 confirmed speakers on that, and we'll give you more updates as time proceeds. So with that, I'd like to get to the topic of the show. This topic was actually kind of difficult to come with the actual title for this show. So my apologies in advance if you don't particularly care for this title as it relates to the subject matter. It is called Who Understands the African American? Who Understands the African American? And for some, when you first hear it, it may sound a bit convoluted, but as I will get into the actual subject matter, you'll grasp exactly what I'm getting at when I use that title. And the reason why this was kind of difficult for me to actually come up with a title is because there's so many ways to address this particular subject. This is based, this was inspired actually by a particular article. As many of you know, those who've been following me know, a lot of times what I like to do is I like to go and search articles and current articles that deal with current events and or commentaries by various people in media, and dive deep into it, unpack it, and address it from the perspective of nationality. As I always say, nationality is the order of the day because nationality determines political status. And nationality is the one thing that most of our people, those of us who have been historically classified as Negro, Black, Colored, African American, etc., have not been educated on. We truly have not truly been educated on the importance of nationality. And I came across this article that was interesting. It was perplexing and a bit disturbing. And it's not that I'm easily rattled. It's just that because I know there's so many different opinions and things, but this particular author, he's very interesting. Guy by the name of Jason D. Hill. And the thing about it was that I kind of was trying to see what is this particular person's agenda? You know, what is his intention? What is his end game because I believe he's a professor. He is a professor on philosophy in Chicago, DePaul University, and he also is he's a professor. He's an author. He's a commentator, and he's one of those individuals which tend to take a particular viewpoint when it comes to the struggles of people who are classified today as African American. So what I like to do is first, before we take our break, I want to start it off by reading an article that I've read before. It is from the Moorish Literature. It actually was an original article that was produced in a newspaper, an old newspaper known as the Moorish Guide back in the 1920s. And the name of this article is entitled, "What Shall We Call Him?" So I will read this article to give context to what we will go into next. And later on after the break, I'll read his article and go into a little bit about his background and just what are my thoughts as far as what is being spoken about, the subject matter. Okay, what shall we call him? So often, our various journalists find trouble in selecting the proper name for the Moorish American. Some say Negro, another will brand him race man, still another will call him Afro-American, and then come colored, dark American, coon, shine, the brethren, and your folks. It is indeed a hard matter to find something suitable for the various occasions where a title needs to be used. Is it that these people have no proper name? Did they have a national name when first brought to these shores in the early part of the 17th century? If so, what was it? Did not the land from which they were forced have a name? It now appears a good idea for those whose duty it is to write for the various journals to find out what the national name of the forefathers of these people was. Also look into the history of the founders of civilization and see who they were and where they stood in the building of the present civilization. Probably 2 hours in an up-to-date library would serve to relieve the strain on our men of letters when the occasion presents itself for a title for these people. The matter of the various names given to these 22 million people with all colors of every race of the globe was an act of European psychology. They gave him a name, then defined it as something inferior to theirs. White, they define as a color of purity. Black, they say, represents everything of evil. The Negro, as they were called in this nation, have no nation to which they might look with pride. Their history starts with the close of the Civil War, or more properly, with his being forced to serve someone else. Thus, he is separated from the illustrious history of his forefathers, who were the founders of the first civilization of the old world. This matter should be looked into with a hope of correcting it. So that's the article, What Shall We Call Him? And with that, we're going to take a quick pause for the cause. And then after that, we will continue. When we come back, we will continue our discussion. You are listening to What Is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. You are tuned into WDRB Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. We'll be right back after the break.
Calling all business owners, all independent artists, and all nonprofit organizations. If you are in need of radio advertising, we encourage you to call 877-342-7770. That's 877-342-7770. Through their Community Give Back Project, there is an entrepreneur foundation that is paying for free radio advertising. That's right, I said free, F-R-E-E, in support of our small business owners, independent artists, and nonprofit organizations. Please call 877-342-7770 in order to receive your free radio advertising today.
Welcome back to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, and those streaming live through free TuneIn radio app and through iHeartRadio. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. I'm the author of several books, including What is the Higher Self, which you can purchase on my website, shemel.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. Also on my website, you have the opportunity to enroll into my 6-month mentorship, which is known as Trauma to Triumph Training, where you get the opportunity to address generational trauma, racist trauma, and also post-traumatic slave syndrome, where we can deal with those issues and get back to the mindset of our great people of the past. So that being said, also be tuned in for those. We are still going on for the Social and Economic Conference, the first Social and Economic Conference in Durham, North Carolina for January 2022. We have an additional speaker for that particular conference. So we have 2 confirmed speakers for that conference, and you will be updated as things come into place and progress. So getting back to our episode topic, if you're just tuning in, we were discussing the topic of the show, which is who understands the African American. Okay, so as I mentioned previously, is that this particular episode was inspired by an article written by a professor from Chicago, or lives in Chicago, and their name is Jason D. Hill. So basically, to kind of give the context, I'll go brief into who this person is, but then later on I'll go deeper into who this person is. So to give just a brief overview, this man is a professor of philosophy in DePaul University in Chicago. He actually is a Jamaican American professor, meaning he was born in Jamaica. He's born and grew up in the country of Jamaica. And then he was born there in 1965, grew up there, and he immigrated to the United States in 1985. Okay, and then eventually became a United States citizen. Okay, so I'll just leave that there, and we'll dive more into that. But what I like to do, getting into the actual article that is important, is there's an article that he wrote for, no pun intended, The Hill, is which deals with the Capitol Hill, politics. So he wrote this article recently and published it very recently as an opinion contributor. And the title of the article is "What Do African Americans Owe America?" The question and the title is "What Do African Americans Owe America?" Interestingly enough, he has a book out with the title called "What Do White Americans Owe Black People? Racial Justice in the Age of Post-Oppression." Okay, and I guess this is a bestseller that he promotes. Okay, he also has a couple of other books that he has, but I'll get into that a little later. but I want to just kind of give you the context of this person. So he has a book out entitled "What Do White Americans Owe Black People? Racial Justice in the Age of Post-Oppression." Post-oppression, like this is after oppression, like there's no oppression going on. Okay. And then he writes an article, a recent article entitled "What Do African Americans Owe America?" So I'm going to read it. It says, "I gave an interview recently that involved, among other things, the subject of gratitude and debt. A listener emailed me afterward asking this, quote, against the backdrop of claims for reparations, what do African Americans owe America? Should African Americans be grateful that they are Americans and not Africans?" End quote. The question struck me as odd at first. Black Americans, I thought, owe nothing more to America than any other group of Americans. But considering claims for reparations for extant damages incurred through slavery, some blacks today claim that white Americans owe them quite a bit of reparative compensation. The questioner inverted the reparations claim to imply that African Americans have a debt to pay to America. To make philosophical sense of the questions, let's consider what they should be grateful for. Okay, so now he's getting into what should African Americans be grateful for, so-called African Americans, right? Their freedom from the chains of slavery, but this was a God-given birthright, one could assert. The granting of freedom was not a gift bequeathed to them or a privilege bestowed. It was an inalienable right denied and eventually applied. So they need not be grateful or owe their emancipators anything. Analogously, one could say that children have a right to be looked after by their parents. They did not ask to be born. However, given that parents can renege on parental responsibilities, children ought to feel gratitude toward them for fulfilling their obligations. Now, the author at this point is now paralleling the relationship between the slave and the slave master to that of the child and the parent. So he's now equating, think about this. He's using the analogy of children and parents. So he is just, at this point in the article, and I'm not done yet, at this point in the article, he is now equated so-called African Americans, Negro, blacks, colors, and African Americans to children, and the so-called white people, right? Caucasian people as the parents, because the parents could renege on the responsibility. They could renege on it. So the children should feel grateful that they fulfill their obligation, right? So they should, so likewise, they could, these African Americans should feel grateful that, they did the right thing and they gave you your freedom. They could have not given you your freedom, but they gave you your freedom. Okay, let's move further. He goes on to say this: African Americans, one could argue, ought to feel gratitude that the fiduciaries of the people's well-being, let me repeat that. African Americans, one could argue, ought to feel grateful that the fiduciaries of the people's well-being and rights eventually fulfilled their leadership roles in recognizing the rights of those once expelled from the human community. The attendant respect to the institutions through which their liberty and freedom were forged is an ethical mandate for Black Americans. Why? Because although their freedom was their God-given birthright, those who held them in bondage could have kept them enslaved and refrained from affirming their dignity and recognizing their inalienable rights. So we're supposed to be grateful to the oppressor for no longer issuing that form of oppression. They denied you of something that is your God-given birthright, and right, they could have continued doing, but they stopped. So I'm grateful. So let's use this analogy. A woman gets raped repeatedly by a man. Repeatedly. And let's say this is repeated because they have let's say they're husband and wife. Let's say they're in a relationship. Let's say whatever it is. But the man repeatedly sexually assaults this woman. Repeatedly. And that is a violation of her human right. The man decides, you know what? I was wrong. I'm going to stop raping you. I'm going to stop abusing you. Should the woman feel a sense of gratitude towards the rapist for no longer raping? That's the question you got to ask. See, this would never be written in an article. That would never be put in the article, but yet and still, this is what's put by this Jamaican American professor / author. Okay, let's continue. Let's go to the next paragraph, shall we? He says, slavery has been ubiquitous throughout history. It existed in ancient Greece and Rome, in the Near East, and in sub-Saharan Africa. Emancipation is a recent phenomenon, a Western and European concept forged in liberal Enlightenment values that establish political principles out of a Judeo-Christian moral axiom that each individual possesses inviolate dignity and intrinsic moral worth. I'm going to stop there. So this is, you got to understand, this is a professor. So he like to use big words. But I know everybody may not grasp what this guy is saying. So he's basically saying that slavery, it was just a common thing throughout world history. It existed in Greece, Rome, it existed in Africa, right? It existed in the East. So he's saying that slavery is kind of ancient, but the emancipation of slavery is more recent, it's more modern, right? And he has the audacity to say that the concept of emancipating a slave is a Western and European concept that is forged in liberal Enlightenment values that establish political principles out of what he says moral axiom, right? He's basically saying Judeo-Christian moral values, right? A concept, an idea, that this idea is rooted in Judeo-Christianity. Judeo meaning Judaism and Christian meaning Christianity. So he has the audacity to say that the concept of emancipating someone comes out of Christianity. When it was the Pope, the Roman Catholic Pope, who issued a papal bull in the 1400s. 3 of them, not one Pope. 3 popes, Roman Catholic popes, issued 3 papal bulls. A papal bull is an edict. Papal meaning of the Pope. The Pope issues an edict, a declaration, where he says that the Saracens, right, and the Negroes, basically, I'm paraphrasing it, shall be in perpetual slavery, not emancipated, perpetual. That means forever, forever, ever, right? So, you can look this up, and I just want to kind of give context to this. Of Papal Bull authorizing slavery. Okay. All you have to do is look up Papal Bull authorizing slavery. Papal, P-A-P-A-L. Papal Bull, as in a bull animal. And you'll find that one of the popes, there were 3 popes that were involved, but one of the popes was Pope Alexander the Sixth, and he issued a decree known as Inter Caetera. That's 2 words, I-N-T-E-R, Inter Caetera, C-A-E-T-E-R-A, Inter Caetera, which he authorizes slavery. He justifies the colonization of America and the enslavement of the Moors. Okay, that's in the Moors. You know, for those who don't know, are the Saracens would be the inhabitants of Northwest Africa, the original inhabitants of Northwest Africa. And you know that the inhabitants of Northwest Africa were kidnapped, and many of them were brought over to the Americans. You know, not all of us came on a slave trip. Many of us were already here, granted. And there was also another papal bull called Dum Divisus, right, which was issued in all these was issued in the 1400s. Dum Divisus was issued in, I believe, in the 1452. Inter Caetera was issued in 1493. And Dum Divisus was issued by Pope Nicholas V. Okay, also dealing with authorizing slavery. You can look this up. You can Google this, right? This is how real this is. So I want to give you the concept, give this to you. But yet and still, this guy had the audacity, the utter inundated gall to tell you that, you know, that emancipation is a recent phenomenon, that is a European concept, and it comes out of Judeo-Christian morality, moral ideas, right? When it was Christians that were enslaving. You see what I'm saying? Like, so that each individual possesses inviolate dignity and intrinsic moral worth. It's a bunch of garbage, malarkey, you know what I'm saying? Nonsense. And those are the words I'm using because we're on the radio. But you know what I'm saying. So let's continue on with this article. Okay. So he goes on to say, and this is a long article, actually, but I'll read the entire article because I want you to kind of get an idea what this guy is, how this guy's thinking. Keep in mind, he's a Jamaican American professor and author. Okay. So watch this. So he goes on to say this, quote, in being granted full equality before the law, Blacks were given a legal and public personality, thereby making them part of the sovereign mass of a constitutional republic. the inalienability of their rights was codified in law. False. That's not true. No one ever identified as blacks were given a legal and public personality. Doesn't exist. In fact, the Dred Scott case proved that. What he tells you this, but he gives you no references of any cases. He gives you no case examples. He gives you none. He never he doesn't give you any case. And those of you who have been listening to this show know I give cases after cases. The number one case that nobody wants to deal with is the Dred Scott decision. They don't ever, guys like him never talk about the Dred Scott decision. They don't want to touch that because they know it totally debunks their whole narrative. Not only that, I also want to make note, since we're talking about law, the Christian black codes, not just the black codes, the Christian black code, which speaks to his other point about the Christian, the Enlightenment and the Western European concept that came out of Judeo-Christian moral axiom. The Christian black codes of 1724 that said that blacks were civilly dead. They had no rights. Blacks, right? The Dred Scott case says that blacks have no rights that a white man is bound to respect. This is law. Supreme Court, this is law. But this guy will just make these random statements. He doesn't know law. In the law and he knows, I'm sure this guy knows about the Dred Scott case. They will never go into that. But I'll continue on. So it goes on to say, but it is not fundamentally gratitude that African Americans owe America. It is rather a duty to remain in the historical process into which they were delivered via slavery. The sub-Saharan ancestors of today's African Americans were encased in pagan animism. Their progressive emancipation as rational subjects was not just compromised, it was foreclosed to them. The African indigene was a natural creature who had not yet transformed himself out of biological time into an epoch-making world historical person. Having failed to abstract himself from nature by transcending it, the sub-Saharan indigene viewed himself as inextricably bound to nature. To enter the historical process, one must see oneself as transcendent of nature. Nature becomes a thing, not that one adapts oneself to, as do animals, but rather as a malleable entity that adapts to human needs, desires, aspirations, and creative capabilities. He's saying, and let me translate this for you because he's giving a lot of fancy words. He is saying that the indigenous people on the continent that's called Africa today were nothing more than pagans who operated on the level of an animal. This is a Jamaican American. I keep saying that. He's a Jamaican American professor. From DePaul University in Chicago. His name is Jason Deep Hill. I'm not making none of these words up. You can look it up. You can just Google the title, "What Do African Americans Owe America?" Then look up Jason D. Hill. I'm not making any of these words up. He's saying that the indigenous person, the native of Africa, did not transfer. They said he basically trapped in the time warp, was operating as part of nature. So he was on the level of an animal and did not evolve to make history. Okay. And then he goes into the sub-Saharan indigeny. Okay. He fails to speak about the kingdoms of Mali, the Songhai, the Ghana, right? We're not even getting into ancient Egypt, because a lot of people like to go to ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet. Like, yeah, we built pyramids. So he's knocking that out by saying sub-Saharan, because the argument is that they'll give usually is that all of those people that, there was mixed with the Greeks and all that stuff. But he's not even speaking of, he doesn't speak about the history of the Songhai Empire, the Mali Empire, the Ghana Empire, Timbuktu. These weren't pale-skinned Arabs, I'm just going to say. It wasn't pale-skinned Arabs who were responsible for these things. These were dark-skinned, melanated brothers and sisters on the continent of Africa who established these things. This guy either does not know any history, which is sad for him to be a professor and not know any history, or he knows history and is purposely being ignorant, being willfully ignorant. Ignorant, the root word of ignorance, to ignore. He's purposely ignoring the facts as it pertains to this. So this is what he's saying. This is the same narrative, by the way, and I just want to interject this, that a lot of people of European descent said. And this is like so archaic. Like, this is the stuff they were saying back in the early 1900s, late 1800s. Like, yo, you should be happy. Your people, y'all was savages. But he's being fancy and nice with it. He's being real slick and sophisticated in how he says it. But that's basically what he's saying. He's really spewing out European psychology and white supremacy in this article. So it goes on to say, only a self that is divorced from nature can enter the historical process. That is divorced from nature. Okay. An irrevocable tie to nature condemns one to a life of cyclicality, a range of the moment existence in which innovation, change, moral, and political evolution and creative adaptation is not possible. Tragically, it took slavery, which Africans facilitated with the Europeans, to transplant the indigene into the historical process by asserting him into the civilization crucibles of Judeo-Christendom with its emancipatory moral narratives and an evolving political philosophy that discovered, recognized, and protected the inalienable rights of man. These include freedom and liberty, the right to the pursuit of happiness, freedom of consequence and speech, the right to bodily integrity, and the right to property. The induction was tragic. It involved a violation of a natural right to freedom, yet it was a precondition for the indigene to comprehend the singular meaning of true moral freedom. This is a freedom found in being bound to natural law. It is a freedom from non-existential encasement in living as a purely biological creature, as dictated by the precepts of an animistic worldview. True moral freedom is found in being bound by moral law. We have the capacity to follow the laws of reason that lead us to adhere to the invariable laws of nature. This guy just literally said, and put it in layman's terms, He literally said he said that in order to be of any value in history, to order to contribute to civilization, you have to be taken from your you have to be divorced from nature, meaning you can't operate within a natural environment. We're going to go more into this actual article, but first we're going to take a brief pause for the cause, because there's a lot to unpack here. But once we do that, we'll get back to it and explore it more. So I definitely want to see how this unveils when we go into this particular article, because it's a lot, and it's just this guy is something else. He is truly something else. But we are going to take a brief break, a brief pause for the cause. After the break, we will continue our discussion and continue this breakdown and see how this relates to nationality. So you are tuned into WDRB Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after the break.
If you want to educate, empower, and inspire our community, we're providing a wonderful opportunity for anyone who feels they can make a positive impact in the lives of others by applying to be an on-air radio personality. To set up an interview, call 877-342-7770. That's 877-342-7770 to apply. This is your chance to step out on faith. This is your chance to get the experience and education that you need in order to launch to the next level of greatness and make a significant difference. WDRB Media is now hiring on-air radio personalities. If this is you, no experience is required, no previous education needed. They do all the training. Call 877-342-7770 to set up your interview today.
Welcome back to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, and those streaming live through free TuneIn radio app and through iHeartRadio. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. I am the author of several books, including What is the Devil Sometimes Called, which you can purchase on my website, sheml.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. And if you're just tuning in, we were discussing a topic which is entitled, Who Understands the African American? And this was in relationship to an article written by Jason D. Hill, who's a Jamaican American professor out in DePaul University in Chicago. He is also an author of several books. So if you're just tuning in, we were just talking about the statement he made, basically, that he said, about the African American. So to recap, he was saying that in order for anybody to be part of history, making history, to contribute to civilization, you have to be taken away from nature. Ironically, a lot of Europeans are getting back into nature. They're doing this whole eco-friendly thing, living off the grid, all of this, which contradicts his argument. This guy's argument about being having some contribution to history, while still, that can't be done by being in tune with nature. And then he says, well, tragically, it took slavery to do it. We had to take you out and enslave you. Now, keep in mind, again, this guy is a Jamaican American. He's a Jamaican American professor, which means he's a melanated man who was born and raised in Jamaica, one of the places where slavery took place, right? But he's not applying that to him. He's applying it to the African Americans, right? That's what he's saying. So he's like even psychologically divorcing himself from the situation. Catch what I'm saying? But let's go into who he is. Okay. So if you look up Jason D. Hill on Wikipedia, and I'm just going to read some of his stuff here, and I'll try to be brief. Jason D. Hill, Jason Damian Hill, born 1965, is a Jamaican-American professor of philosophy at DePaul University in Chicago. Hill was born and grew up in Jamaica. He describes himself as, quote, mixed race, unquote, in Caribbean terms, but he is, quote, perceived as being black in America, unquote. He immigrated to the U.S. in 1985 when he was 20 years old and eventually became a U.S. citizen. Hill has written extensively about his journey to the United States, most notably in his last book, We Have Overcome, an immigrant's letter to the American people. Hill, a gay man, has credited Ayn Rand's work with helping him come to terms with his homosexuality, especially as someone who grew up in Jamaica, a country he describes as, quote, the most homophobic culture in the world. Okay. And it goes on to say, after coming to the United States, Hill earned a BA, magna cum laude, in philosophy in Georgia State University and both a MA and PhD in philosophy from Purdue University, eventually becoming a professor and an honors distinguished faculty member at DePaul University, where he teaches courses on ethics, political philosophy, and American politics. With regard to his intellectual principles, he has stated he is committed to moral foundationalism, moral universalism, and the absolutism of reason. Politically, Hill has defined himself as a conservative Democratic and as a conservative independent. Now, opinions and beliefs on racism in the U.S. And I'm just going to try to be brief on this. Okay. Hill has written that he has experienced racism, but does not consider himself a victim, stating that, quote, you encounter racism, you deal with it, address it, and move on. Interesting, because as much as he would like for people to believe that, he has built a catalog of works based on race. If you're not a victim of racism and racism is not that important, right? And you moved on from racism, why do you build a catalog of literature based on race, right? It says in his most recent book, We Have Overcome, he responds to Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, arguing that Coates' books, quote, reads primarily like an American horror story, and I'm sorry to say, a declaration of war against my adopted country, the U.S., right? So, but you moved on. So why are you responding? You know what I'm saying? Like, so he has an ulterior motive, in my view. You know, and there's a lot of people who are like that, who take this position of, you know, saying, well, move on from racism. But then again, they always address racism. If you moved on from it, then why are you worried about talking about it? And it's not like you're giving solutions on how to deal with it. He writes a book, We Have Overcome. Like, he's basically saying, I got over it, y'all get over it. You're right. With me, with this show, What Is Your Nationality? I am telling the public the way we can best address this issue of racism and white supremacy is to learn our nationality. Let's study study what nationality is, proclaim our nationality, and operate off of that nationality, where when people address us and we are identified, it directly connects us with land, history, and culture, as the late, great John Henry Clark says, right? We are a nation within a nation in search of a nationality. We have to proclaim our nationality, because nationality determines political status. And nationality is the one thing that has never been fully explained to us as a people on how to operate it. And then to furthermore, the same guy, Jason D. Hill, he published an article where he argued that the Palestinians should be stripped of their right to self-determination. Okay? And there was controversy behind that. So not only is he someone who is critical of the so-called African American, right? He is against the nationality and self-determination of the people in Palestine, right? So obviously this guy has an agenda, and people may wonder why I read his whole background, and in the Wikipedia, it says that he's a gay man. He also wrote a book. If you check his website, what was that book? Oh, a Jamaican Boy in Search of America that deals. It's a nonfiction, but it deals with the idea of homosexuality, basically. Okay, so I want to put this in contrast to another author who was a gay man during the Civil Rights Movement by the name of James Baldwin. James Baldwin was a gay man. He was an openly gay man, a proud gay man. But yet the difference between him and Jason D. Hill is that he understood the struggles of the people here in America, in the United States of America, who are identified as Negro, Black, and colored, and African American, and all types of names. And the terms, at that time, he would say the term Negro. He knew the Negro problem. He was well aware of the Negro problem and stood in opposition to the racism that was here. He was well aware of the victimization of our people, and he spoke out against it. This guy here is like, well, go ahead and move on, And then somebody may say, well, that's because he's from Jamaica. Well, Marcus Garvey was from Jamaica. And he spoke against the issues. So I'm actually going to kind of conclude at this time because we don't have a lot of time. But what I do want to say is I'll probably do a part 2 because I have not finished the article. I'll do a part 2 on this actually, and explore more about this. But it definitely seems to be that there are a new line of people coming out who have an agenda against people identified, who identify as immigrants, who speak against the cause of the people who are here